Good morning, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Errol. So happy to be with you and hoping that the weather passes you by.
Me too, me too. Because, but the thing is, what's so fun about living through a tropical storm or a hurricane is that I'm always fascinated with the insects that come with it and the different birds and stuff. So the morning after, the bird calls outside are so differently, which is very interesting because I swear to God that Brian Wilson would do the same thing. He would go outside and he would listen to the sounds that are out here because his ear is just so magnetic.
He had not only did he have an amazing ear or have an amazing ear, he only has hearing in one ear, which
What?
makes it even more remarkable that he was able to write and arrange and produce those records that here we are 60 years into the Beach Boys career and people still love the music.
He, he's like a Mozart.
Well, it's funny. When I used to think of him as Beethoven because he had a scowl on his face, and then when I saw Amadeus, I was like, oh no, he's more like Mozart because Brian really loves to laugh and have fun. But when I asked him about it, he said, no, no, I'm like Bach because he thinks of his music as spiritual, as as
Yeah.
as almost church-like. So sometimes if you take the lyrics off and listen to him, he's making church songs. So he really believes, seriously believes, and it's who are we to argue with him? He believes music is the voice of God.
Right. I mean, now that you say that, my mind is going through every single Beach Boys song. You know, God only knows, good vibrations, fun, fun, fun. And now I have a completely different view of the Beach Boys music.
Well, yeah, I mean, in my room, surfer girl, the
Yes.
warmth of the sun, don't worry, baby, please let me wonder, Caroline, no, and on and on and on. They sound like something that if you were sitting in church on Sunday and the organist was playing it, you would think, oh yeah, that sounds right.
Oh my God. You know, your book is like a true piece of music. Every musician has always told me that music is an evolution. So is your book.
Wow, thank you. It's interesting because when I wrote the book back in '78, I was a young journalist. I was a man on a mission, and I really wanted to kind of grab the world by the collar and say, "Do you understand how important this Brian Wilson guy is?" Because at that time, the Beach Boys were they were having a comeback, but it was always about the hits,
Yep.
and it's like, no, no, no. Paul McCartney is influenced by him. George Martin says he was the guy that the Beatles were emulating. So when I wrote that book, I was trying to kind of promote this notion that Brian Wilson was this important artist that should be taken seriously. Now here we are, 40, almost 45 years later. I became Brian's friend. Now I'm kind of an elder statesman looking back on the journey that Brian and I had together in the years since the original book came out. So what I'm able to do for the reader is give them a fly on the wall experience of what it's like to be with Brian Wilson in all of these different circumstances. And I think that's what makes the book really special. I went from being an outsider to an insider, and I kept the original book intact. So you're getting two books for the price of one, which is a pretty good deal these days.
And you know something, David. In reading the book and having the book, also still feel that you're the student, you're the listener, you're that person that discovers new things with the band all the time. Because I feel like that instead of you being the one, I know this. No, you're going. I'm gonna know this. I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna do this.
Well, thank you. I think that, when it comes to great music, there's always something to discover.
Yeah.
There's a reason. I teach a course at UCLA called The Real Beatles. And these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids come to my class. They sort of know the Beatles music. They like the Beatles they've heard it from their parents or their grandparents. But I'm telling them the story of the Beatles, and they are spellbound
Yep.
because they don't know it. They don't, and the evolution of what happened from this scruffy band who was playing these clubs in the bad side of town in Hamburg to becoming the biggest thing in the world then and still are.
Yep.
I mean, they still are the gold standard of everything. And so the fact that you can listen to these records and uncover new things, and that fact that they looked at Brian Wilson's records as how did he do that? How do we do something that's as good as that. That was really fascinating to learn in conversations I had with Paul McCartney and George Martin. So you're right, Arrow. I am always to this day learning and discovering new things about Brian.
What's really interesting in reading your book, I was touched by the fact that Paul McCartney says that he feels something deep with Brian's music, and yet as a fan of music, I always heard of the competition between the Beatles and the Beach Boys. I don't want to believe that there was a competition. I think that was just great marketing.
Well, actually, there was, we'll call it a friendly rivalry, in that when Brian heard Rubber Soul, well, first of all, in 1964, when the Beatles hit, he called a group meeting, and he says, guys, we're going to have to raise our game. So he was quite aware, of that popular music had changed dramatically. And I think the first single after the Beatles arrived in America was "I Get Around," backed with the "Don't Worry Baby," maybe one of the greatest singles in the history of popular music.
Right.
So he was aware that they couldn't beat the Beatles in terms of cultural significance. The Beatles just were something all by themselves. But when he heard Rubber Soul in the fall of '65, he said to himself, "This is different. This is an album where all the songs sound the same. I'm going to do an album just like this." And the result was Pet Sounds. And when the Beatles heard Pet Sounds, they were like, "Oh my God, what is this?" And George Martin told me that when they went in the studio to make Sergeant Pepper, that was their attempt to equal Pet Sounds. Not that they did. It was just their attempt to do it. So when I produced a tribute to Brian Wilson at Radio City Music Hall in New York back in 2001, George on stage in introducing Good Vibrations said, if I had to select one living genius of popular music, I would choose Brian Wilson.
Yep.
Well, that's pretty strong praise. And Elton John was there, and Paul Simon was there, Billy Joel, Jimmy Webb. I mean, a whole bunch of great folks. But Brian was sitting on the side of the stage, and he was believing that he was a big deal because all those people were there.
And yet his imagination went a completely different direction, or so history tells us. And your book, puts us in those places where he disappeared for a while. And it's like, what was he resting? What really happened here? Because we've seen the movies, we've all talked our own story about it and things like that. But you were there.
Well, I wasn't there when he first withdrew. I was in high school.
Right.
So I had to come out here and find it. I worked on a documentary produced by the legendary Don Was back in '95
Yes.
called "I Just Wasn't Made for These Times," and you can actually watch it on YouTube, and it's a pretty informative piece and important, because for the film we interviewed Brian's first wife, Brian's late brother Carl, Brian's late mother Audrey, and they say things in the film that you can't. I mean, I heard this stuff firsthand when I was writing my book, but it's a different thing to see it. And to hear Carl talk about, I like the Smile music, but Mike Love, he didn't think the lyrics were right for us. To hear Marilyn Wilson say they wore him down. Now that tells you that there was an internal conflict. So you combine that with the record company didn't like the new directions Brian was going in. That Mike Love didn't like the new direction the group was going in because he didn't think it was right for the fans. That Murray Wilson, who had been the group's manager, Brian's abusive father, was the publisher. He didn't like the direction. Brian was taking some drugs. There was this whole mess, and nobody, you can't assign percentages to it. But at some point, he said, "Okay, I've had enough. I'm going to withdraw for a while." He didn't stop writing songs. He didn't stop writing great songs and making great records. He no longer could be the full-time leader of the pack, if you will.
Wow. I've always believed that creativity is an addiction, and it's only because of the story of Brian Wilson and stuff like that, where it's like, okay, I recognize that they've taken too much from me. I am now empty. I must be fulfilled again. Where am I going to find it?
Well, I think with Brian, it was an addiction, and it was a compulsion.
Yes.
And I've come to believe that if he hadn't had such an unhappy life, we wouldn't have gotten the great music we got.
Yep.
In the sense that when he sat at the piano and did what and played what he called feels, he was looking for a piece of music that I think would heal his soul. And when he found it, he would turn it into a great song and a great record, and we would get it. And it helped. We didn't know the source of it, but it sure helped our souls. It helped heal us. It helped make us happy. So we're the lucky bystanders of all this. I don't know that he ever ran out of inspiration. I think what he ran out of was the need to prove anything.
Oh. That's wide open right there. That's why listeners need to get this book, because you share things with us that make us have these oh wow moments, or wow, that wasn't part of a Rolling Stone magazine article that I've read before. and so so your book serves more than as a backstage pass. It's almost like you are allowing us and giving us permission to step into the life of Brian Wilson.
Well, thank you, Arrow. I like to think of it that way as well, and it's a privilege that I don't take lightly. In writing the book, there was a lot of stuff that was like, okay, do I put this in, or is that a betrayal of our friendship? Because I was very conscious of that, and so I could probably fill 10 books with stories that are just nobody's business. So what I tried to do was write a book back then and here in 2022 that only dealt with his artistic journey. So if you want to understand where this guy came from, how a kid growing up in Hawthorne, California, the first song he writes is Surfer Girl. How does that happen? And even as recently as last year with his At My Piano album, when he just played very beautiful, soft piano versions of his favorite songs of his own, whether it was Don't Worry Baby or God Only Knows or Heroes in Dawn. The guy is so he's so smart about everything.
Yeah.
And that doesn't come through in all the talk about he's in his bed or whatever. I mean, I've seen it. He just remembers everybody and everything, and he just loves hearing people play his music beautifully, listen to it and respond to it, and then order a room service steak.
He's also a brilliant listener, because I've been with him a couple of times, and he listens, and he brings questions to you as the person that's supposed to be the interviewer, but you're not. You're part of a great conversation with a regular everyday guy who happens to be a musician.
He is a regular everyday guy, absolutely. And I think the reason we're friends to this day is we just had fun hanging out.
Yeah.
So we'd go to the Y and we'd go swimming. We'd go to the movies. We'd go out to dinner. We'd ride in the car and sing along to the radio. And he is the most sincere person you could meet.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have an ironic bone in his body. And back around 2007, he was writing this new rock opera called That Lucky Old Sun, S-U-N. And I said to him, hey, Brian, why don't you change the title to That Lucky Old Son, S-O-N?
Yes.
That would be kind of ironic because of your father. And he goes, no. I mean, it wasn't even a discussion. No, because he is so sincere. And I think that comes through in the music.
Absolutely, it does. So one of the things that I've learned about the Beach Boys is how down to earth they are as an entire family and team. And the reason why I bring that up is because here in Charlotte, David Baird has been an instrument to the Beach Boys and stuff like that. Have your paths crossed with David?
Oh, absolutely. Endless Summer Quarterly. I've known the guys Lee and David for decades. I mean, back into the 1990s at least.
Wow.
And David. Is probably the Beach Boys' biggest champion in print, and my focus is on Brian, because I think that's the story that will matter ultimately.
Yeah.
One could write a book about the Beach Boys' road adventures, about the marriages and divorces. None of that stuff interested me. What interested me was, who is this magician who created this amazing music? And how did it happen? How much insight can I give the reader into that by talking to the musicians, by talking to his collaborators, and get a sense of of what was happening at the moment he was creating his greatest music.
Yeah. Well, see, and what I find fascinating about this entire story is that his history is just as big as an Elvis Presley and Elton John, and you sit there, and even an Ed Sheeran, but it's Brian Wilson. And it's like he didn't need to have the gigantic posters of Brian Wilson. He just let his music do the talking.
He really did. He was never about being a star.
Yeah.
I mean, his father was really misguided. He didn't want there to be a Beach Boys group. He thought Brian should be a solo vocalist and be
Oh.
the next Elvis Presley. I
Yep.
mean,
Yep.
how absurd was that? But Brian was an uncomfortable performer, particularly in the early days. In the late 1990s, he started touring again as a solo artist, and he actually found he loved it. He really enjoyed going. He would tell corny jokes on stage, and he just had a great time doing it. And so he is Elton worships Brian Wilson
Hmm.
beyond all imagination. You talk to Elton about Brian. I mean, when we did the Radio City tribute, Elton did a duet of "Wouldn't It Be Nice" with Brian, and then he performed "God Only Knows" by himself.
Wow.
And Elton, I remember when we asked Elton to appear, the answer was yes. Just tell me where to be.
Yep.
I mean, there was and one funny thing that happened, because Brian, was used to doing concerts, but he wasn't used to doing tribute shows, especially one to himself. So I said to Elton, when you guys finish, wouldn't it be nice if you would walk Brian off stage? And Elton said, sure. Anyway, when they finished, wouldn't it be nice? Elton turned. Brian had already bolted and was off stage. And Elton came off. He was laughing. He goes, he got here faster than I did. I mean, it's just, he is unlike anybody else, which we're all unlike anybody else. But he is, as you said, he's Brian Wilson. So
Yeah.
who is this guy? And I think I've written more words about him than anybody else alive. And I think in this book, or I know in this book, you get insights into him that you can't get anywhere else.